So you've been working on something for weeks, months, or even years, and it feels like you've gotten nowhere. You're beginning to question if you're on the right path, and you wonder if you should quit. Everyone you watch online is telling you to keep going, and you want to keep going, but you feel like you can't. This is kind of how I was feeling the past week, and I've definitely had feelings like this before that. And it doesn't have to be as big of a deal as we make it. Just think of it as being flexible or going with the flow. And for a bit of perspective, I looked into some influential people, companies, and games that pivoted, and that was what ended up making them successful. YouTube actually began as a video dating site, and they changed it to be more of a general video platform. Netflix started as a DVD rental service and moved to streaming and creating their own content, and I think a majority of old media companies have done something similar, or they went out of business. Fortnite, not a huge fan of it myself, but it actually started mainly as a cooperative survival game, but went fully into Battle Royale after the success of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. And that game was actually originally a mod for another game. Changing directions is simply how we as people and the things we create evolve. There's many reasons change can be difficult, but it's much better to go with it and do what you can rather than get stuck and left behind in your old ways. But sometimes we don't see that we're slowly falling into a rut and avoiding change. This is why it's important to not just go through the motions all the time. Instead, focus on being in the moment each day and think about what's working and what isn't. Reflect and take feedback from others as often as you can, and realize that just because a certain method is failing, it doesn't make you a failure. For me, this is honestly a bit of an issue I have with our culture. Our work becomes tied to our identity, which isn't as much of a problem if you do something that's very meaningful to you, but the reality is that most people just find the best job they can to get by and use that money to fuel other things they enjoy. Their job really has nothing to do with who they actually are. So I encourage you to separate your identity from your work or certain ways of doing things. For me, it's made a pretty big difference in how I feel about myself and helped me pursue several more things I'm interested in. And as you start to change, or even just consider changing, it might feel like all of your effort that you put into that previous thing is going to be completely wasted. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. Think back to the first thing you did when you started that thing. If it's a YouTube channel, think back to the first video. If it's music, think back to the first song you played. If it's a job, think back to the first few weeks in the job or the first few weeks in college or trade school. You've learned so much to get to this point, and even if it isn't working out and you have to change paths, very few of the skills that you learned are going to be 100% specific to that thing. The majority of what you learned will most likely be able to apply to what you do next in some way, shape, or form. And I did say to take feedback from others, but always make sure to do that in context of who they are. Think about their life as a whole, at least what you know, and think about if you would want to switch places with them. This isn't to judge them, it's just to gauge how valuable their advice is. It's the classic example of don't take health advice from someone who's unhealthy, and don't take financial advice from someone who is broke. If someone hasn't done what you want to do, or something similar, consider their advice, but take it with a grain of salt, and don't get too worried about applying it unless you think it's a really good idea. And if you're uncertain about a pivot you're about to do, just remember you can always go back or just pivot again. Once you decide that you don't have to do one specific thing one specific way, you can iterate as much as you want until you find what works. Maybe if you're experimenting with diets, do some research and try all of the ones that you're interested in and that have good evidence for 30 days, and think about which one made you feel the best afterwards. I'm not a nutritionist or a doctor, but something like that worked pretty well for me, and I was feeling much better afterwards. And learning about nutrition is now something I really enjoy. But I think that's all I have for this one. I hope this helps at least one of you guys, and just remember to be honest with yourself and to just go with the flow. Anyway, I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.